So hello, this is Neil Romanek from Feed Magazine, and I'm talking with Roger Crothers, who is the head of technology at BBC Wales. Hello, Roger.
Hi, Neil.
Hello. And the last time, actually, the last time I spoke to you was when BBC Wales was I think, had just kicked off the big project there to create a fully IP facility. And I don't think there'd even any building had happened. I think we were looking at kind of digital mock-ups of what the place might look like. Now it's a few years later, and you're up and running. Um, so yeah, I would just love to hear more about the facility, how that build actually went, and what it's been like, and what you anticipate going forward. So maybe do you want to kind of start by telling us about the need to create a fully IP facility, why BBC Wales was the place to do that, and kind of how that whole process went, and kind of maybe lead us up to it becoming up and running now.
Okay. I suppose it's timing. It came down to timing as to why we went down the IP route. IP standards were obviously quite immature at the time, but they were emerging, and so we saw that. We saw there was a standard called a simply standard called 2022-6, and there was a lot of talk about that. And we thought, well, do we really want to build an SDI infrastructure? I mean, a lot of people will be saying like SDI were dead. Mind you, they've been saying that for a long time. But we didn't want to build something that we thought that we'd have to rip out at some later stage. We wanted to be as future-proof as possible. You know, we were fortunate to get the investment from the central BBC at the time to build this building. And, you know, these opportunities don't come around every year. So what we wanted to make sure was that we built something that was as future-proof as possible. And IP was part of that. I mean, there was lots of decisions we made around the facilities we built, virtualized lots of our server estate and things like that. We took the opportunity to do that. And we were quite ambitious. You know, we said, well, nobody in the BBC, certainly no one in the BBC, certainly very few other broadcasters in the UK were doing IP. Or if they were, it was a very small proportion of their infrastructure. We saw some people doing it around the monitoring areas, or some people doing running pilots. And we thought, well, you know, the panacea for us is to get end-to-end IP from edge devices all the way into the core and back out. That was our ideal scenario. Obviously, it turned out a little bit different to that. I mean, for lots of reasons, but largely we kind of achieved that. But because our project duration was quite long, 2022-6 wasn't the latest standard at the time that we ultimately made the procurement decision. It was actually 2110. And so, which was elemental flows for IP, which suited us better. It was something that we thought was a truer IP implementation. And so we went down that route. Then, of course, you know, we spent a long period of time procuring devices and you know, edge devices, whether they be vision mixers, sound desks, cameras, all those kind of things. And our requirement was that we needed it to be, you know, 2110 natively compliant. And of course, varying degrees of success around that, because the maturity of the standard, it had only literally been ratified a few months after we made the decision, before we made the decision to go down the 2110 route. So clearly we were kind of dependent on suppliers actually delivering 2110 products. And actually we wrote that into our procurement documentation for a large number of those. And that's how we achieved that kind of success on that.
Because it is like it seems like it is a bit of a moving target, you know, especially you're starting at a time when you kind of launched this, or kind of set out on that journey. IP was still a bit, okay, we're not quite sure how we're going to do this. As you said, the standards changed. And then as you're doing your procurement, I'm assuming there's new technologies kind of coming up all the time. And at some point, I suppose you just have to jump in and pick where in the stream you're going to land. So what was that like? And of course, does IP, the flexibility of IP, kind of help you a little bit with that?
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, timing was a good thing for us because we could make a decision to go to IP. Timing was also bad for us because of the immaturity of IP and the lack of interoperability out there, and lack of available shipping products that were 2110 compliant. So it's good and bad. I mean, you know, we had this idea at the outset. We never thought we'd get 100% of devices natively IP. We set a target of 60%. And we thought, well, look, worst case scenario, we can always revert back. We could revert back to 2022-6, and we'd seen that working in various places. We could even go back to SDI if we needed to. And when we went to tender, we did ask for for pricing from suppliers to deliver each option, and so that's how we kind of made ourselves feel a bit more confident about getting to where we wanted to, and that it wouldn't be a complete disaster. Of course, we were never going to let it get to that point, and we managed the situation quite well, I think, go through the process. And we were quite clear with suppliers that, you know, the condition of awarding contracts was on the basis that they would deliver 2110 compliant technology. And lots did, you know, sometimes it didn't work first time. You know, we had lots of interoperability testing. We had products being released and they weren't quite working, or they were working with their own sister products in by the same company, but of course you try to interface them with somebody else's and then they don't work. And so we went through quite a rigorous period. We probably spent a good 14 to 18 months on interoperability testing and building a kind of a test build to try and get confidence that the 2110 was going to work for us.
And then, so I mean, what has been the upshot of that? Kind of, you know, you're actually up and running now, and you know, people are, you know, it's a working facility. So what has been the difference? What have the advantages been to all that hard work?
Well, I mean, it is up and running. I mean, we've been live in the Central Square now in Cardiff for about a year. Our first systems to go live were Playout. But we're, you know, on a regular basis making live programs out of there, and all of that's using the IP infrastructure, and actually it's performing very well. You know, we're quite pleased with. You know, there are difficulties associated with adopting IP, not least getting engineers up to the skill level that they were at with SDI type technology, the traditional broadcast stuff, because it is different. And so we've invested a lot of time and money in that. So it's not without its difficulties. When we bought the solution, as I said, we wanted to go down wanted to achieve at least 60% IP. We've got to about 60%. There was a number of devices which are only SDI still. And so we have gateways which convert from SDI into IP. And that enables us to use some technology, which is our choice, tool of choice, but allows us to interface it with the IP core that we've got. So it's working fine. Like I say, it's using sort of Cisco switches at the core, and they work pretty fine. I mean, we have very little issues with that. That actually works quite well. We use GD Convergent, which was what they were shipping at the time. I think they use a product called Orbit now, Grass Valley. But Convergent works for us. The big differences between an SDI infrastructure is this thing requires patching, the switches require patching, they require security updates and all the rest of it. You didn't have that with SDI. You know, I mean, you might have had firmware updates, but it wasn't like you're patching operating systems like we have to do now. So there are some burdens to having IP, but the benefits, just going back to your question, the benefits are we're format agnostic. You know, we can take feeds out of our studios, which are, you know, HD, 4K, 8K. As long as we've got the bandwidth at the core, we can move that media around. We can even take 360 camera feeds and we can feed that directly into the core. So we don't care about the shape and size. It doesn't have to be 16:9. We can just take that. Because of that, it means that we don't have to rip out if we suddenly decided to do all our live programming in 4K. I mean, you know, terrestrially, we're not able to do that right now in the UK. And so there's not a need for it right now, but it means we're future-proof to some degree. We may have to increase bandwidth on the trunks internally on the network, but there's nothing technically stopping us from doing it. The other thing is it allowed us to architect a solution which allows us to be more resilient in the way we work. So for example, we have something called dynamic allocation, which is our ability to dynamically allocate cameras or equipment from one gallery to another. So we can switch. We've got 3 galleries in the building. We've got 4 studio floors, and we can actually drive any one of those studio spaces from any one of those galleries. That's only possible because of IP. because otherwise you'd have hardwired cabling going between rooms. Of course, IP takes that away, and what you have now is IP packets which traverse the network and they can be routed to anywhere. And so that gives us that real flexibility that we want and gives us more resilience in the build.
Great. So then looking forward, say in the next 6 months, to year, what kind of new technologies you're looking at, or how do you think things may unfold? And also, how does cloud figure into that? Are you looking ahead at cloud and embracing cloud more fully?
Yeah, well, we're looking at various things at the moment. We've spent a big chunk of the time since going live stabilizing things, up in the skill levels of the engineering team, and that's in a pretty good place at the moment. We are looking at other things now. We're looking at enhancing some of our output with more AR. We put AR and VR into all our studios, and obviously we have aspirations to make our programs look better, more exciting, and more engaging to the viewers. So we're looking at various things with that. One is more AR, possibly pitch side AR as an offering. We've got AR throughout the building. We make use of all of our filming spaces in the building. We've got a large atrium, which gives us a good backdrop in there. We've got large video walls in our studios. We've got AR and VR, as I said. We're looking at whether we can integrate social media products to try and get more engagement from the viewers, particularly around things like rugby offerings. It's a very popular sport in Wales, obviously, and we like to engage with the audience as best we can, and that would enable us to do that. And then on top of that, we are looking at other things such as, my train of thought, social media. What else was the other thing we're looking at today? You can edit this, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
I'll come back to that in a second, because something that was just at the tip of my tongue there, and I lost it.
So what about using cloud for live? People are thinking, well, cloud is never going to be, we're never going to be using it for live. But of course, now that's becoming a thing. And how are you seeing that as an option going forward? And how does that fit into the mix?
Yeah, well, we didn't build that into the infrastructure. We have, however, since bought some cloud services, if you like. We bought some storage in the cloud, which is fairly basic offering. A lot of people doing that. It's pretty easy. It's beneficial in that it allows us to store media off-site and allows us to protect content, so it's not all in one site. It also makes it more easily accessible for people around the world. So if we've got execs that want to look at content that we've made in Cardiff, we can upload that to our cloud storage, and we can allow them to access that. The other thing we're looking at is we have recently had some demonstrations of some cloud-based gallery in a box, if you like. It allows you to have kind of vision mix of multiple feeds, which are all timecode synced, and allows us to, in theory, especially where there's a minimal number of cameras, if it's like a 6 or 4 camera sport production, that you can actually take those feeds into the cloud. You can switch between those, and you can do that literally from an iPad. I mean, whether we'd actually go for an iPad, I mean, the operators in the BBC would prefer to use proper control surfaces because they're much more tactile, and they suit the way they work better. But in theory, you can do that all without having a gallery in place. Now, it's already looking quite attractive because those are actually something that you purchase. You don't have a large capital outlay. We had to sink a lot of capital into this building to make it work. What those solutions allow us to do is to pay per hour for the use. And it means that we don't have to sink a lot of capital. Therefore, if we don't win the rights the next time, we haven't sunk a lot of money and we're not desperate to try and recover our costs. So I can see lots of advantages to it, particularly where they're time limited rights that you're trying to cover, because that's where the cloud model really benefits, I think.
Great. So then looking at, COVID obviously was a big challenge for everybody, no matter what the circumstances, but certainly for broadcasters and people who really needed to, or felt like they really needed to be in the same space in order to work. And then a lot of lessons were learned. It seems like that, especially through using IP, that people were able to work remotely. Things were able to be a lot flexible. Did you kind of learn anything at BBC Wales about different ways of working throughout the COVID pandemic, and ways that you hadn't maybe anticipated or never thought that you would need to use?
Um, yeah, I mean, it was obviously a difficult time for us. We had a timeline for going live, and coronavirus sort of pandemic uh, kind of happened right it was in the center of it really. We'd gone live with Playout, but not with a lot of our other services, and pandemic came about. We were limited on people in the building. Of course, there was a lot of fear at the time. People didn't want to come in. They didn't want to use public transport. In fact, a lot of public transport wasn't even running. And so there's lots of challenges in that. You know, as an organization, we learned an awful lot about working from home.
And this is all in Cardiff, of course.
In Cardiff, but across
Yeah.
the BBC, I mean, you know, we had this challenge everywhere.
Right.
Galleries tend to be small places, and it's difficult with social distancing to jam as many people into that small space and maintain a 2 meter distance. So we put things like barriers in there. We've limited numbers of people in there. We've only put essential staff in. We limited our sites to essential staff only. You know, we've had things like lateral flow testing, one-way systems, temperature checking. We've limited, you know, suppliers and visitors on site, which has been a challenge because, of course, when you're going live, quite often you want those suppliers on site because they're doing implementation work. So things like remote editing was something that was a lot of people were calling for. You know, in our post-production facilities, what's traditionally happened is you'd have an editor and start right next to them might be a producer that's actually watching the edit and directing some of that, if you like, highlighting the bits they want to include and take out. And it is a collaborative effort. And obviously, if you can't put two people into an edit suite, it becomes difficult to do. So people try different things using Zoom and sharing screens, and some things are good solutions and some things are cheap and cheerful. Latency means that Zoom doesn't really work particularly well for that. It's great for a kind of a video conference like this, but it's not necessarily good for frame accurate editing with an editor there, you know. So we have been developing solutions to try and give people remote connectivity to all the storage here. Not without its challenges. We've obviously needed third-party suppliers to deliver. Of course, they were restricted in what they could do. There's been long lead times on circuit delivery. But we're at the point, you know, throughout coronavirus, we did enable some of that to happen. The bit we didn't have that was seamless was kind of people accessing all the storage and they're kind of proxy editing directly off our facilities here. But we have allowed them to, we have sort of allowed people to take facilities, put those in people's homes, and through manual movement, if you like, of media, they've obviously been able to edit locally, and so that's worked for them. And that's actually worked better than we thought it would, because there's always been this traditional view that, you know, you've got to be in the building with the production teams. But needs must, and you know, when you're faced with something like that, people will work in different ways. And the one thing I would say that's come out of the whole pandemic as a real positive is it shows just how far we could push things. I'm not sure culturally we would ever have been able to achieve some of the different ways of working that we have, that we were forced to adopt. And that's made people think differently. You know, we're now proposing in the BBC different model of working. We've got a hybrid working model where the assumption is that people will come into the office maybe 2 to 3 days a week. Apart from those staff that need to physically be here, of course, there's always going to be some engineers, production teams, and camera operators and people like that. But for most staff, probably I think something like 60% of staff, that they'll be just working 2 to 3 days a week, which allows us better utilization of our buildings, because maybe you don't need as many buildings. Maybe you don't need, maybe you can get more people into different areas than you would have been able to otherwise. So there's been lots of learnings out of that. I mean, the most difficult thing was there was a moment when we paused everything, and that was probably for about 2 months. And we thought, you know what, there was a suspected second wave coming then. And we thought, no, we don't want to be in a second wave. We still had our old broadcast center running. We had our new building partly running because Playout was running from there, but news production was in the other place. And we were trying to man both places. And our fear was with a second wave, maybe we'd get more people self-isolating or contracting coronavirus, and we wouldn't be able to man both. So we took the difficult decision to continue with the program and move into Central Square, regardless of the fact that we were in a pandemic. And it was the right decision. You know, it's not been without its problems. We had to compromise on certain things. We didn't have as long to train people up as we wanted. We didn't have as long for testing as we wanted, but it did allow us to actually migrate and meet our timescales for implementation.
Great. So what are you thinking about the facility over the next 5 years, kind of in the future? Is there expansion you're thinking of, or kind of new things you want to try, or are you thinking just let's leave it alone for a while?
Well, I mean, it depends on availability of funding, of course. You know, the BBC has other obligations it's got to service, and we've been fortunate we've had a good investment in Cardiff. So, having said that, we do have other sites in Wales, and I look after all of those. And we do have a drama facility down in Rothlock, which is in Cardiff Bay, so a few miles down the road. But it has all its own infrastructure there, and its own technology, and its own storage, and the back end processes all dedicated for its purpose. It would be beneficial for us if we could somehow remotely control or remotely access the central square facilities for that site, meaning it'd be easier for support point of view. We wouldn't be managing quite so many separate systems. We wouldn't need all of the separate storage, nearline and high-end storage that we currently have. And the idea would be that it would mean that we probably need less engineering effort on site, so it would be more efficient. And because we've got a large data store in this building, plus cloud, of course, it would mean that we don't have to maintain and keep headroom in all of our different storage platforms that we've got across BBC Wales, because that's always been a problem for us. You know, if every site has its own storage, and they're all kind of teetering on the brink of being completely full, which is quite often the case. What that means is that we end up with an obligation to refresh that one and refresh this one and refresh the other one. That's expensive to do, and it's not really the best use of public money. So we need to be clever about how we architect things to enable us to actually work from a central core. And whilst we're looking at that from a kind of Wales perspective, the BBC is obviously looking at that more widely and saying, can we do that for all our big sites? So rather than Cardiff have all its own kit, is there stuff that we can remote from there? And that is work that's ongoing. But of course, it does take time and investment to make it happen.
Great. Well, best of luck in the future, and thank you so much for talking to us. And I look forward to hearing more about how things are going. And the next time I talk to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan.
Okay, and cut. So that's lovely. Thank you for that.
That's okay. The bit that I wanted to talk about was cloud. It completely slipped my mind.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You asked the question as a follow-up then anyway, so.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, I forgot to ask if there was anything else that you wanted to cover that we didn't get into.
I mean, I suppose, one of the things that we've done, which has been, I think, quite ambitious, was the virtualization of about 400 server systems. They were physical servers in BH, in our old building. And we took the decision to virtualize that. And that's often against the ideal scenario that a supplier would want. Suppliers often like to supply you the kit as a turnkey key solution, and they say, well, if you're going to virtualize that, we can no longer guarantee the performance. And clearly that is something that worries us, because we do want them to guarantee performance. That's what we're buying. We're paying premium prices for these solutions. But they're saying, yeah, but the virtual platform you're sticking it on, unless you hard provision the requirements for that, so you mandate a certain amount of storage and memory. And if you do all of that, of course, then the benefits of virtualization are somewhat lost, because you don't want to hard provision things. You want it to scale and use extra resources when it's necessary. You don't want to hard provision a certain amount of storage and disk on the basis that it's always got it, because of course then you need as much resources as you'd have in lots of individuals. Saving the physical servers, that is, of course, because what we've got is a large kind of blade-based virtual farm. But we've got about 400 systems, as I say, which have all been virtualized, and they work very well. It allows us to do maintenance on systems by spinning up other duplicate systems. We can take a copy of a virtual machine, we can apply an update, we can test it. If it breaks it, then we won't put it on the live one. Those kind of things are very difficult to do in a physical environment. If you've got machines running across the 2 VMs that we've got, in the cluster, then you can take one down, the other one serves the business as normal. So you can do it within normal working hours. That's something that we could never do. We'd never be able to do that previously. The risks were too high. So I think that's been something that's been really successful for us. The other thing that we did, which I think was a real cultural thing to overcome and delivered huge benefits, was the automation of our galleries. I mean, it's not something that's particularly new because automation has been around for many years, but we automated all our galleries, and we don't have camera operators. We still have a couple of manual cameras, but most of them are robots now or track-based cameras, and the lights are controlled by automation. The vision mixers are. And so we can actually put quite complex news programs together, which would be 30 minutes with just a couple of people in the gallery. Traditionally, that was about 9 or 10 people that we'd have in there. So from an efficiency point of view and, best value for the public, the license fee payers money point of view, it's been really beneficial to us. So that's one of the real success stories of the whole thing. I mean, IP is great that it works, but it's kind of doesn't do anything. It just sits there and it just works. I mean, that's brilliant if it does, because it just sits there and works, and no, people don't see it. The public don't see that. They do see output on the screen. So where you can automate the output, and so you're still making the same program with fewer people, great value for money. If you can use things like AR, which enhance the program, that actually changes what the viewer sees and how they maybe, this is why we're looking at social media stuff for interaction, because you can actually get more value out of those same audience members, because you can actually engage better with them. You can get live feedback from them. You can demonstrate, you can render that information as part of the program. So you're getting that much truer kind of engaging experience for the audience, which is something we've never been able to do. What we built with Central Square allows us to do exactly that. And so they're the kind of things that I think have been the real benefits, and they're the more visible things. The IP core, it just works. Actually works better than I had hoped, if I'm honest. I mean, it's never, not that I thought it wouldn't work, but I thought it would be more problematic, if I'm honest. I think we thought it was going to be a bit more flaky, that there would be lots of things in there which we hadn't foreseen, but we did spend a lot of time testing, and actually it proved invaluable because it works extremely well, and I'm very happy with the way things are at the moment.